Thank you for tuning in to Hacks and Hobbies with your host, Junaid. In Season 2 of Hacks and Hobbies, we're visited by our amazing guests coming from all walks of life who want to learn their story, their struggles, and their journey on how they got to where they are today. So stick around. In this episode, we get to speak with Kerry Heaps. She helps speakers gain more paid speaking engagements. She's from Florida, and seriously, I'm just reading this right off of her LinkedIn connection, and we've had a chat here and there before, and I'm just here to learn more from Kerry here, how she does what she does. She talks about there's a lot of speaking in, you know what, let Kerry introduce or give us a little bit of hint of what she's about. We had a intro conversation, and man, I'm so bad at this. Kerry, thank you so much for coming on to the podcast here at Hacks and Hobbies.
I thank you so much for having me as a guest. It's an honor to be here with you and also with your listening audience today.
Absolutely. It's great to have you here, and we're just here. So the purpose of Hacks and Hobbies is we want to talk about life hacks and different hobbies that myself and my friends and my colleagues and people, amazing people, entrepreneurs that I've spoken with, and how they've converted that hobby into something more. And then the reason for reaching out in 2019 for season 2 is to learn more from amazing speakers, authors, entrepreneurs, how they've gone through their journey, like what's their journey, what different struggles they faced, and how they overcame that to be where they are today. So tell us a little bit about your journey and your story and how you got here.
Absolutely, I would love to. Well, my story starts basically, I started my business 15 years ago. It'll be 15 years in June, actually. So I've had my business for quite some time.
Mm-hmm.
And prior to that, I, let everyone know I grew up in an entrepreneurial home. My father was an electrician.
Mm-hmm.
And he had a lot of flexibility. That's something that I saw growing up, that he was able to come and pick me up from school when I was sick. He's actually the one who took me to school in the morning because his schedule allowed him to do that. And I really didn't know any other way to live, really. When I got out of college, high school and then college, I had a variety of different jobs, and I had some really, really great positions. I worked as a legal assistant for a couple of attorneys. I worked at a large construction company at one point where I was, executive assistant to the CEO. I did a lot of their meetings. I had jobs that paid well, that most people, once they get a job like that, they pretty much stay put. But there was just something inside of me that just wasn't settling. I couldn't quite figure out what it was. I just never seemed to be happy. I wanted more freedom, more flexibility. And as luck would have it, I was actually teaching some classes, some modeling and acting classes at John Casablanca
Mm-hmm.
in Jacksonville at their location. And an opening had come up for a salesperson to do, inside sales. And it was pretty much an all commission based position. And one of the other instructors had encouraged me. They said, "You should apply for that." And I thought, no, I am just not good at sales. I don't think that would be a good fit for me. And she kept pushing and prodding. And I was like, well, okay, I'll give it a shot. So I interviewed for it. And because I was already an employee, they went ahead and just transferred me over. They still allowed me to teach, but I absolutely thrived at that job. And it was very hands off. I did not have anybody checking on me. I was able to come in, do my job, and go home. And I was selling something that I really believed in, that I really liked, and, partook in, on the flip side, teaching.
Mm-hmm.
So it went very well. And the more I was like, you know what, I would love to because I had modeled a lot when I was younger. So I thought, I would love to have my own agency, teach some modeling and acting classes, and, also be able to do image consulting, work with people in the pageant industry. So I figured out I need to be an entrepreneur. Clearly it was in my blood. So I relocated to Orlando, and I'll kind of wrap this story up pretty quickly. But I got another position in sales doing outside sales, and that was for a staffing firm. So my job was to go out and schmooze and mingle with different people and attend big events and find job orders. And when we got too full, we needed to fill those job orders. So sometimes I would have to come in and do recruiting. But during that time, I took a year. I worked part-time in the evenings to save money to start my business. And probably about a year and a half into it, I finally said, okay, today's the day. I went in, I put my 2-week notice in. And that Friday, I remember thinking, oh my gosh, I'm free. I don't have to worry about anything anymore. And that Monday morning, I woke up and I remember there was a really light rain misting outside. And I went to my dining room window and I thought, oh my gosh, what did I just do? But I have to say, it's 15 years later, and I wouldn't trade my worst day as an entrepreneur for my best day in corporate. I think when it's the right fit for people, to be on their own and to have their own business, there's nothing like it. But it's not for everyone, just like corporate isn't for everyone either.
Exactly. The that's a really cool story. I mean, having that, growing up watching your dad, having that flexibility of entrepreneurship that really sets in, um, like, wow, that's so cool. Like, why do I need to spend 8 hours here at the office in corporate environment when I could be doing something more flexible? And that's really cool.
And I will say too, I mean, it's and I, over the years, my father's retired now, but I, remember growing up, there were times that, he struggled, with his business. And then there were years that he really flourished. And, it's never, I tell everybody, entrepreneurship, it's just not a straight line. Even when I started my business, I was going back in to do, to start an agency, to train, modeling for, the pageant systems and, to be in that side of things. And as luck would have it, I actually started doing a lot of business to business marketing, and my everything that I wanted to do took a back burner for many years up until a couple of years ago. And I started doing trade shows. I was helping businesses with their marketing. So where I wanted to go, it turned out I thought, well, I'll start doing some of this until my image consulting and pageant stuff takes off. And it kind of took on a life of its own. And that happens to a lot of people. Sometimes you start out on one track and something you get sidetracked or something else happens. And not that that's a bad thing, because I will say everything that I have learned during those first, 10 to 12 years helped me just do what I'm doing now even better.
Yeah. Because those experiences, you learn off of it, and then you're like, I learned this over here and I can apply that to this that I'm doing. And it definitely, I mean, that experience is a key. And one thing that Gary Vaynerchuk tells everybody, all the students, they're telling, and then, he's like, because right now entrepreneur is a hot term. And everybody's like, oh, I want to be an entrepreneur on Instagram. Oh, I'm an entrepreneur. They want that. It's like a entitled label, so to say. It's like it's hot. It's something hot to have. But what he says is that if you want to be an entrepreneur in a specific industry, go work in that industry and learn everything you want to know for 5 years, and then start your own business. Because unless you have that experience, unless you have money flowing and you have backing from your parents or whatever, you have, you're just not going to make it. It's not going to work out as good as everybody thinks it is.
Well, I would say two things to that. I do agree with that. I think everybody really wants to be an entrepreneur. And like a friend of mine used to tell me, Lauren Little, she used to say, people see my glory, but they don't know my story. They see how great oh, well, you get to take off in the middle of the day. But what they're not seeing is that you worked 3 days in a row until 2 a.m. on whatever project or whatever you needed to get done. They're not seeing all of the back end stuff that the entrepreneur is doing to make their business successful. And I would say too, with money, when I started my business, I worked for a year part-time and saved up money. And did I need more? Sure. Was it a stumbling block? Yes. Did I learn a lot from it? Absolutely. And there have been times, over the years where my business has been lean and I've had to work part-time. That happens sometimes. But if you really believe in what you're doing, and you're going to do whatever it takes to succeed. As far as like, I'll never forget, I went into, which they're not, ironically, not in business anymore, but I went into a women's entrepreneurial center that was funded by the state prior to leaving my job. And I had talked with them about getting a small business loan.
Yeah.
And, they were like, oh, what you're trying to do, it's never going to work. You're not going to make it. And, I didn't, I just sat there politely and I smiled. I didn't say anything. Then they had asked me, they said, we're looking for equipment to be donated. Does your company have any computers or anything that you could donate? And I was like, yeah, I think we do actually. And I was able to get them a donation, and I left and I never went back.
Yeah.
And I wound up, I remember several years later, probably like, I don't know, 4 or 5 years later, I was driving by the same location and there is a for lease sign across there because they didn't make it.
Yeah.
They did not make it, and
Mhm.
I did. So, you have to I think to be an entrepreneur, there's a couple of things that I would share with your audience is that you need to be passionate about what you're doing. It's just like I speak. I do a lot of speaking. I do other things besides that. And everybody wants to be a speaker.
Yeah.
But what they don't want to do is have to do all of the applications, do all the open call for speakers, fill out those forms, on an ongoing basis, putting your information out there. The 3 engagements that I have on my calendar this month, they asked me to come and speak in February of last year, and I applied to speak in November of the following year for them.
Wow.
So it's time consuming, and most people want everything to happen now, 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 and it just doesn't work that way. Entrepreneurship is no different. But having a passion for what you do, because that is going to get you through the hard times. Just like I said, I have hard days all the time, but they're different from what I had when I worked at a company.
Right.
It's not that you're dealing with a coworker, but you could have a client that is a little bit challenging, or maybe you have a really rough schedule traveling. Those things happen, and it's just taking a lot more out of you physically than what you thought it would. But it's all part of the process. You have to have that drive. You've got to really want to do what you're doing. And I would agree with going and working for someone. I recommend to everybody, if they want to have their own business, go do outside sales. Take an all commission job, even if you did it part time or as a weekend thing or as a hobby, because it's going to teach you. I don't care what industry you're in. I don't care if you're an accountant. I don't care if you are a speaker, if you own a gym, if you're a personal trainer, if you're a photographer. You are going to have to become adept at selling yourself. Because if you can't do that, if you can't go and get your own clients, do not hang that sign out. Don't do it, because you'll never survive. When you're an entrepreneur, that's one of the main hats you have to wear in the beginning. You're responsible to go bring in clients. If you don't bring in clients or bring in business, you are not going to eat that month. It's just that simple. So I would say outside sales, learn how to do that, because, and I've had people say to me, they're like, I'd love to do what you do, but I don't want to do X, Y, and Z. And I'm like, well, then you're right. You're making the right move by staying where you are, because you wouldn't be able to make it. A lot of people just aren't willing to put in the time and the effort of what it's going to take to make a business succeed.
No, you're absolutely right. Outside sales teaches you that, the techniques of being able to talk to people and sell yourself and what you're all about. And if you think about it, kids coming out of college, they have to sell their skills, their education to get a job. And job interviews is exactly that. It is selling yourself, selling what you know from coming out of college to getting a job. And that's one of the reasons why we have so many people still looking for jobs, even though they've got a bachelor's, a master's, or a PhD. They're just not able to find a job because they're not able to market themselves.
And it's so interesting that you bring that up, and amazing actually, because one of the topics that I used to speak on, because I used to be a recruiter,
Yeah.
was resume writing and interviewing techniques. And I used to teach it a lot at the colleges. They would ask me to come out and, hey, we have a graduating class. Will you come out and do this, this topic for us?
Yeah.
And I would always do that. And it amazed me that they never taught them any of this at school, when they were, going through college. And I'm actually bringing that back this year to hit the colleges and the universities pretty hard and say, hey, let me come in and, come and speak to the graduating class, because you're right. It's really, you've got to know how to sell yourself. And it's, whether people want to think interviewing is that or not, it doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, that's really what it boils down to. You're selling yourself. Why am I the best fit for this particular job? And you'll continue to do that throughout your career. Or if you become a business owner, you're going to be doing that, presenting why you're the best choice for whatever project or whatever client. So it's interesting that you would bring that up.
Yeah, because the other thing that I've noticed, and I have people in my connections, they are LinkedIn, like they speak on LinkedIn on their campuses, talking
Mm.
to students, telling students, hey, you got to have this on your profile for people to find you on LinkedIn. Because LinkedIn, again, is a marketing platform for your skills. And if you're going to school, if you're, going to come out and want to work for a specific company, well, you got to have those things in your profile so you can market yourself. And they talk about making your profile very specific to what the type of job you're looking for. So it's
Hmm.
really, really important. I mean, being the oldest of, six siblings and having tons of cousins who are always like, oh, I'm looking for a job, or, they're just going to college and, they did their bachelor's, they went and found some work, but then it wasn't really what they wanted. And then they go back to college because
Hmm.
going to college, it's a comfy zone. It's like a comfort place.
Hmm.
That makes sense.
It is, and I see a lot of people returning to it to get their masters or, to further their education, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Mm.
But at the end of the day, I think if we're not equipping people to, again, you've got to know how to sell yourself. And I
Mhm.
was very fortunate when I went to school. I had a gentleman, and I actually ran into him a few weeks ago at a restaurant, and I made a point to tell him, thank you for all that you did for us, because everything he taught us how to open up a bank account, how to balance our checkbook, how to budget for groceries, how to budget a monthly budget, how to interview, how to write up your resume. He
Wow.
would bring in all different types of speakers. I mean, he was just an awesome, awesome person, Coach Jim Beelan, and he's since retired. But I made it a point to tell him, you've made such a profound impact. And he said, thank you for telling me that, because, he said, honestly, sometimes I think as educators, they don't hear it enough. If you have a mentor or someone who has been teaching you and they're impacting your life, share that with them. I think sometimes they need to hear it, that they're doing a good job. They're doing the right things.
Exactly.
But for whatever reason, they just don't always teach us all of these things. It's the same thing with entrepreneurship. I don't see it. I wish that they would do more of that on college campuses and the high school level and talk to kids, because that is the growing, even if people have a business as a hobby, which is great, anymore, it takes more than one stream of income to make ends meet. That's just the economy, how things are.
Yeah.
And I think the more we can teach people to, hey, if you have a business you're thinking about, and that's a great way to segue into a full time entrepreneurship position,
Mhm.
is to start out part time, make it a hobby.
Exactly. And that's one thing that I've been seeing a lot of people doing, that they're getting into jewelry making. It's their hobby, but then they figure out, oh, I can sell this stuff on Etsy. You have
Hmm.
Etsy store or whatever, or I'm doing crafts and different things, or I'm into woodworking and I can be fixing cabinets, or I can be making furniture. So these hobbies are, they're good for the mind, but they're big, but they can also be a full-time thing that people can do.
Hmm.
And these days we have so many opportunities and so many different avenues to market ourselves. We have YouTube, we have Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn. We have so many different applications that enable us to constantly share what you're doing, and get in a way to show people your artistry and show people what you can do. And if that's your end goal, then you're in the right path doing that.
Exactly. And I think too, like I said, it's not being a full-time entrepreneur. I don't think it's for everybody. Just like I think corporate was not a good fit for me. It was almost like I was allergic to it, like it was giving me hives or something. It just, and people would say to me, "What is wrong with you? You've got such a great job." And
Mhm.
I you can leave when you want, and you have your own office, and
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't want this. I want to be on my own. I want to be the boss, that's what I wanted.
Mhm.
And it was just, again, I think it was something that it was not going to be laid to rest for me until I went out and did it. And again, I tell people, I tell my story, and I did not start with any money. I did get a very small business loan, one of the worst things I could have possibly done a few years into my business, and it was only for $5,000, but that's a whole nother topic. But
Mhm.
logistically, I was able to do it and still feed myself. I mean, I'm not saying I didn't have tough times,
Yeah.
but I was able to make it happen. And again, I think if people really want it, they'll find a way to make it work.
Mhm.
Money or not, they will find a way.
Exactly. And what's really cool also is the different flexible jobs that are available. For example, you could be an Uber driver, or you could
Mhm.
be a Postmates delivering food to somebody. There's a lot of flexibility in that area, and I've seen a lot of people taking those because, one, it's very flexible for them. They can go back to school and then still make some money on the side, and they're not tied to a 9 to 5 type of job, so they have more
Mhm.
flexibility.
Yeah. And, honestly, like I said, I think part time, doing it when we say hobby, part time, getting into that, phasing into it, I think is probably one of the best ways. It eases people into it. And if you have other responsibilities that are going on in your life, that, you've got children, you have a mortgage, you have to assess your situation too, I think, and see where you're at in your life to see what's the best way for me to approach this. I mean, like I said, I was making plans, but I pretty much dived off into the deep end of the pool, because I put in my notice and I left. And but again, it all worked out great. There's nothing I would change about my journey. But it's also a little bit different for me because I've never had children. I'm not married. And so it's just me. And I think sometimes when you have a family, you need to make decisions based on where you're at, not just you personally, but also with your family, making sure that they're taken care of.
Absolutely. And that's one of the topics my friend and I discussed, because he has kids and he wants to become an entrepreneur. And I have the same situation. And we're like, when do we find the time? Do you get up super early in the morning? Do you stay up late at night when everybody's asleep and then work on our business and work on our marketing and work on the different things that we want to, excel at, and, engaging with the community? There's so many different things.
And to share with you some of the idea, and I will tell you, even if you're single, like when I was actually, working full time and I had a part time position that I did that in the evenings on the weekends, and I saved money for a year. But even as an entrepreneur, I find that the early morning hours, like, even like after 1 o'clock in the morning, that time frame between 1 a.m. to 3 o'clock can sometimes be your most creative time. And whenever if I have a deadline that I'm working on, our magazine, or it's something for editorial, or if I'm writing an article, I find for some reason I produce better work at that time frame.
Yeah.
And I think there are other people who they might find, going to a Starbucks on a Sunday afternoon, that they get more done. I think everybody kind of has to find their own groove with that.
That's absolutely correct. I myself work super late at nights is when I can focus on everything. And it's just somehow like in my mind or in my brain, like there's something that clicks, like, okay, now I can focus. Um, Very cool. So tell us a little bit about book, speak, repeat. Like, how does somebody book to get into the speaking industry? Because I've been talking to and I've been listening to a few podcasts and talking to and this was Sean Douglas. He had an interview on Donnie Boyvin's podcast, and he talks about what he did to become a TEDx speaker and all the things he did, and it was really interesting to hear.
Well, I would say to everyone, if you're interested in speaking, part of the reason I started Book Speak Repeat, I am a speaker myself. I'm not a keynoter. I do breakout sessions, workshops. I will do private trainings for companies. I only have a couple of topics that I speak on. Body language is one. I speak on media exposure and how you can parlay that into more sales. And then I also do kind of another topic that I get booked on a lot, which is follow up and creating a follow-up process. So part of the reason why I started Book Speak Repeat is because when I first started my business 15 years ago, I spoke a lot. And it was so different back then. I mean, back then it used to be that people would come to you and say, "Hey, I want you to come and speak," and they'd book you. Whatever your fee was, they'd write a check. There was never, I mean, it was very different because there were more paid engagements than there were speakers at that time. Well, I had gotten away from it for several years. 3 years ago, I got back into speaking, and my first gut instinct was like, oh my gosh, this has changed a lot. It probably took me about 6 months to figure out how things are done now, completing the call for speakers forms, how to approach private event planners, how to approach the colleges, the universities, or the educational departments, if that's what you're trying to focus on. Probably, 6 to 7 months, during that time frame, I started to get people who were coming back to me saying, "Hey, we want you to come and speak at our event," and figuring out the process, because I'm a process person. Once you figure out what process works, you just continue to do that. And I started to accumulate a pretty big database and, figuring out when, there's open calls for speakers all the time, but, which ones occur for which events. And after I figured out my process and got it implemented internally for my staff to help me with, I thought, clearly this is a pain point for other speakers, which it is. We discovered it's a huge pain point. And, that's the main reason I started Book Speak Repeat, was to help other speakers, get more speaking engagements. But clearly, even with what we do, for people who are interested in speaking, there's a couple of things I would share. First and foremost, the market's changed. There are more speakers now than there are paid engagements. And, I know some people are happy speaking for free, and that's fine. I mean, we don't specialize in that. We only deal with paid engagements.
Yeah.
But it's a changed market. I mean, meeting planners, it's definitely a meeting planners market. So meeting planners clearly have a lot of choices. The content, the educational content of their event is very important. However, who spews that content out is not, because they have so many choices. And there's more and more people who are getting into the speaking industry, ironically, as a hobby or sideline or additional income for their business,
Interesting.
which, they're highly qualified. They're great speakers, but it's, again, the more people that there are, clearly that cuts into how much, there's more competition, so they can, meeting planners, they're expected to do more with less, so that affects what they pay a speaker anyway. But because there's more competition, clearly if they can get someone to do a keynote for less than $10,000, they're going to, if they find somebody that's highly qualified, they're going to go with that person. So money does factor into it a lot. So my recommendation to everyone is that if you feel like you want to be a speaker, that this is something that you want to do, first and foremost, jot down what you want to speak about. What are you going to specialize in? And don't have any more than 3 topics. If you have more than 3, I think it just weighs down the process for everyone. But have 3. You need to have them in a certain format, have it as a topic, a little summary, a few sentences about what that topic is about, and then 3 to 5 takeaways.
Okay.
What the audience is going to learn if they come and listen to you talk at this workshop or during this breakout session.
Yeah.
And the reason you want to have it in that format is because all meeting planners want to see it in that format.
Yeah.
There's a method to it, but I mean, if they decide to hire you to speak, they clearly are going to copy and paste that. And that's what they put in their marketing material on the website for people to register. So there's a reason that they want it that way.
Mhm.
But clearly, you as a speaker want to put that together because you're the one that has to deliver the speech. So you want to make sure that you're delivering exactly what you told them. You never want to come in and do a topic. It might be on body language, but you covered everything that was not outlined in what you sent to them. So having that's a huge thing. Deciding what topics that you want, and then deciding clearly what's your goal. Are you wanting to get into speaking full time? I'm not saying it's not possible anymore, because it is,
Mhm.
but just being realistic. I have many speakers who come to me who are in the $10,000 to $20,000 range, and if they're not going to be negotiable on their fee, we can't work with them because they're not going to get any work. Those engagements are few and far between. It's not like what it used to be. And you've got to be negotiable on your fee. Usually the highest that we see for a keynote is anywhere from $5,000 to $10,000, and they typically will pay for your travel. But getting more than that is very, very, very tough. You really need to be cornering the market with what you do, or be a celebrity in order to get that type of fee. So being realistic and being negotiable on your fees. Another big one is you got to be easy to work with. And it sounds silly that I would say that, but nobody wants to deal with someone who is acting like a diva or a prima donna. You need to be easy to work with. You need to realize that, if you come to speak at a large event, like for example, I'm speaking at the wastewater treatment show for the second time next week, and it's in Indianapolis. It's the largest trade show for the wastewater industry. 30,000 people go to that show, and, to attend. So I'm one of 205 speakers.
Mhm.
So clearly, if I am being difficult to work with and I'm making the job of the event staff harder, they remember that, and clearly they're not going to rehire you. Meeting planners talk. They're going to tell other people, don't hire this person. This is what they did.
Mhm.
So just being easy to work with, get things turned in on time. If you're going to call at 2 o'clock, or if you say you're going to call at 2 o'clock, call at 2. And you need to be on time. That's a huge thing for them. One of the event planners we work with, she gets over 2,000 submissions a year for the event that she puts together for all the different speaking tracks. And as she told me, she said, if I find somebody I'm interested in, I send them an email. I give it 24 hours. If I don't hear back from them, I move on to the next one. Because as she puts it, if they're not going to be alert and get back to people in a timely manner,
Mhm.
they may not show up on time. They may not show up at all. They've had all sorts of things happen. So being easy to work with is a huge one, an absolute huge one. And getting things in on time, and doing your job and showing up, going the extra mile. Don't just come in, speak, and leave. Come in, speak, talk to the attendees, mingle around. I mean, and that's also a great way for you to get additional bookings. I always do that. I'll go and talk to exhibitors, and I wind up getting business cards from them saying, hey, we hire speakers, we'd love to have you come and talk at our event, or come in and talk with our staff. So always make sure that you're exploring every opportunity. And it doesn't happen overnight. I mean, typical turnaround time to get booked. Like I said, right now the open calls for speakers are for events that are in the latter part of the year, like December, November, December, or early part of 2020. They
Wow.
book out very early. You're building up future income, and you got to be prepared for that.
And so how do these companies or events decide which speaker to pick? Like, for example, if somebody was starting to speak or want to get into speaking, what what kind of portfolio would they have in order to be like, okay, you're a speaker that we can bring on board?
You need to be authentic and be yourself. Don't try to bend the tree too far. And what I mean by that is that every single event that you apply to, we apply to pretty much everything, even myself included. I have my assistant does all of my submissions, and I just have her apply to every possible venue out there that has an open call for speakers, because at the end of the day, each event, it's going to be different. For example, body language. They may have had someone, they may turn me down because they had someone last year that spoke on that topic, or they just don't feel it's a good fit. for what they're trying to do this year, you'll never have access to that kind of information. So that's why it's best to just go ahead and apply and see what happens. I get booked to speak a lot to women's audiences, but it's not for women's events.
Yeah.
Usually it's for events that are highly populated by men and have a small percentage of women that come to the show. So most of the people I know who try to target women wouldn't even think of applying for some of these shows, even though it would be easier for them to get booked. So I would say be very open. Just don't think about it. Just go ahead and apply. Because if you put too much thought into a certain event and try to get behind what the meeting planner is thinking, you'll never apply. You will waste so much time. You will talk yourself out of every single opportunity. And you never know. It's the same thing with media. I did an interview on a contractor's radio show a few years ago. This gentleman heard me on JV Crumb's podcast, and he reached out to me and said, I would love for you to come on and, can you do, a segment for us on follow-up? And it's mostly electricians and plumbers that listen to my show. And I'm like, I'd be honored to. I went ahead and did it, even though it's not my target market.
Yeah.
And as it turned out, that's actually what helped me get into the wastewater treatment show last year. Because when I submitted to speak, I remember, because I filled out the initial application, they wanted video. And we don't get asked for video that often. It's like maybe 50% of the time, but it's never a deal breaker. And I had submitted this particular interview because I said, this is I was talking to your target audience, take a listen to this show. And how I knew that the meeting planner had listened to it is because she called me up and said, hey, you're the daughter of a contractor. She would have never known that had she not listened to the show, because I normally don't share that all the time, and I don't have it on my website. So she had listened to the podcast, and she said, I really think that you would do well if you could do this particular type of topic. Sometimes they will reach out to you and ask you to do something a little bit different. And either you can do it. I would say never say yes that you're going to do it. If they want you to come in and speak on, hardware or software, and you're an accounting person, you know nothing about that, don't do that.
Yeah.
But it was enough where I felt comfortable to say, yes, I can do this. And it was kind of my first crack at a motivational type speech, and it went very well. But again, most people would probably look at the show and go, oh, well, that's mostly men, or it's mostly construction stuff. But they have open tracks for everything, for every different type of show that's out there. They have a leadership track that they need to fill. They have something for human resources. They have certain things that are for continuing education for that field. They'll have things for IT, for workplace safety. So don't overthink it. I see a lot of speakers who do that. They try to get into the head of the person who's planning the event, and it's impossible because every single event is different. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, because one thing that I got out of this is when you're speaking in a certain topic, you're basically niching down to know everything around that topic. Does that make sense? And when you have 3 topics, you can talk very well on those 3 topics.
It does. And you don't always have to have 3. I've met a lot of speakers that they have 20 different topics. And I'm like, look, you need to narrow it down to the 3 you really want to focus on. Because when you go through the submission process, it's not difficult, but it is time consuming. And you don't want to, submit 20 different topics. It makes you look too broad. I mean, you still want to specialize, but having 3, is always a good number. But if you have just 1 or 2, to me, that's even better. But, clearly you don't want to have too many because it adds to the workload and, during this submission process.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, like some of the speakers that I watch, and I'm going to mention Gary Vee again and every time you see him speak out there, he's telling the exact same story because that's the one story that he is really good at. Um, that's really interesting.
Well, and keep in mind too with your topics, and it's the same thing with me with body language.
Yeah.
Every time you go and speak, you have to adjust your PowerPoint and your presentation a little bit to each audience. And what I mean by that is I just spoke at the HRPA conference, and that is the largest human resources conference in Canada. So I knew that the people in the audience were going to be people who are in a hiring capacity. So I always take the same PowerPoint, but I always change it a little bit, and I will use examples from being a recruiter, things that would reflect and be important for them. Now, I'm doing the same body language class for the wastewater treatment industry, but I have to change it because it's a mixed audience. It's not all people who are hiring, but I have to include examples of this could happen when you're doing an estimate, or this could, if you see someone doing certain body language during the sales process, or if you go to their home to give them an estimate, or if you are doing an actual inter office meeting, or you have to fire someone, or you're doing a review with someone in your office, an employee. So you have to adjust it for every single audience anyway, but you want to have like a blanket, what I would call a blanket template of your topic, and have, because you're always going to have to adjust it. And sometimes they will come back to you and say, hey, I want you to do something a little bit different. And it's really, if you can't do it, the best thing you can tell the meeting planner is, look, I would love to do this for you, but that's too far out of my scope. I don't think I could provide value to your audience by presenting it that way, perhaps someone else, because you never want to do that and say, yeah, I can do it, and then show up and it completely bombs because it's too far out of what you're supposed to be doing. And then too, if you have 3 topics, that's a great opportunity. If you do speak at the same show the following year, it gives them, you have 2 other topics that they can pick from, because you've already been back to talk about body language. Maybe you're going to come back and talk about media. So, it always just gives you more expanding options in the speaking industry to have that.
Great. No, those are excellent points. Thank you so much. The one program that I recently joined is, what's it called? Experts on Stage. And these are all, they're also looking at building up a network of speakers and creating evergreen content and enabling, teaching options and courses on these specific topics that these speakers are then going to be talking about. So this was very timely of me speaking with you, because I'm also looking into going to speaking, not in a huge way, but in a way where I still have to speak to a camera and talk about the different topics, or the one topic that I'm going to cover. So, and then, mentioning the fact that you got to have a PowerPoint based on the different audience that you have. Very, very timely topics.
Yeah, and like I said, it's something. I mean, even with my media, I'm speaking on media at the Midwest Veterinary. I have 2 engagements next week, so it's going to be a busy week. But I'm speaking on the topic of media, and it's to a bunch of veterinarians, and so I put in like different pictures of animals, and just to kind of make it, a little bit more stuff that they're used to seeing, and using examples that would help them. So you're always going to have to do adjustments no matter what. So just kind of keep that in mind too.
Absolutely. Perfect. Well, at this point, we asked a few questions to our guests. First one, what is one hobby that you wish you got into?
One hobby that I wish I've been into it briefly in college, but that was photography. And that's kind of on my list this year to get back into, because I touched on it very briefly in college and I loved it. And I love taking pictures. So looking at getting back into that this year.
Awesome. Well, photography is one of my favorite hobbies. I take photographs of, family events and my kids and whatnot. And one guy that I absolutely adore, he's got an amazing YouTube channel. His name is Peter McKinnon. I'll send you a link to his YouTube channel. He's got a lot of cool tips and tricks on photography.
Mhm.
Awesome. All right. What is your favorite movie or TV show? And if none, how about a book?
That's a tough one. I love older movies. I love to watch the Turner Classic Movie Channel. I love black and white movies. One of my favorite films was A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. the old one, like one of the very first ones that they did. And I don't know why. I'm not a big TV fan. I think we have a little too much reality TV in the world. And I think that's probably why I gravitate towards that type of channel and just watching the old black and white movies.
Very cool. Actually, a friend of mine is working on a remake for the Annie Hall movie.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so he's going through the process of, he's got his own script and everything, but he's gonna use the cinematography, ideas from Annie Hall. So I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. So he's got a little podcast going on. Check it out when you get a chance. Okay, next question: what is your favorite superhero?
My favorite superhero. I would have to say when I was little, I really liked Wonder Woman, and that was on TV. That's probably why I liked it so much. But we don't, and I think it's still true today. We don't have that many women superheroes. We need more.
We need more. And we have Captain Marvel coming out later this year.
Yeah, there's been several different shows that are featuring comics and superheroes, and that I'm just seeing kind of come out from the woodwork, and I'm like, oh, that's great, but I'd love to see more that are women.
Absolutely. There's Supergirl TV show has been going on for a couple of years. That's been pretty good. All right, last question. If you were a board game, what would it be?
If I were a board game, well, this one I have to tell you is a little difficult for me to answer, and I'll tell
Mhm.
you why. We've actually been working on a game which I'm going to have released later this year.
Ooh,
Due
that's
to
awesome.
trademark, yeah, I can't really talk about it, but that's actually what I would be. And I can say this: it teaches people how to network and build relationships.
Dude, I would totally be on top of that board game because
Yeah,
that is
it's
one. Mhm.
but that's really all I can say. So
Well, we'll look for it, and whenever you launch it, please share with us so we
I
can
will. I will.
go check
Yeah.
it. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for the chat. Where can my audience find you?
Um, I think the easiest place to go if you're definitely, especially if you're interested in being a speaker, I'm always happy to have conversations with people, to see what I can do to help them. But you can just go to bookspeakrepeat.com.
Mhm.
So bookspeakrepeat.com.
Perfect. And they can connect with you here, and you've got some uh, cool stuff over here that people can learn about. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Kerry. This was really eye-opening and very awesome conversation. I learned a lot. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me on the show. I'm truly honored, and I hope that I was able to help some of the people in your listening audience today.
Absolutely. And we'll get in touch with you soon and have an awesome next week with your 2 speaking engagements.
Thank you so much.
Have a good day. Congratulations, you made it to the end of the episode. Thanks so much for listening to our guest on this episode. Please send me an email at junaid@hacksandhobbies.com to tell me what you loved about our guest today. You could find links mentioned in this episode on the hacksandhobbies.com website.